JD Vance, with his speeches across the world, is changing the very shape of global politics, global leadership, and how these leaders view themselves and their political legitimacy. So much to get into, so many important things JD put into this speech. I have to get you to watch it with me, which is why you're watching this video. Hit the like button, subscribe, or do a comment, whatever helps the algo, and I'll make more vids. I was going to stream this, but I just have so much to spill. I'm going to go ahead and record it and upload it. So guys, please enjoy.
Of the United States, Mr. J.D. Vance, who was here last year as senator, and we are very happy that he has come back to Munich, and we are very much looking forward to his speech. Please welcome Vice President J.D. Vance.
Well, thank you, and thanks to all the gathered delegates and luminaries and media professionals, and thanks especially to the hosts of the Munich Security Conference for being able to put on such an incredible event. We're, of course, thrilled to be here. We're happy to be here. And, you know, one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is, of course, our shared values. And, you know, it's great to be back in Germany. As you heard earlier, I was here last year as United States Senator. I saw Foreign Secretary David Lammy and joked that both of us last year had different jobs than we have now. But now it's time for all of our countries, for all of us who have been fortunate enough to be given political power by our respective peoples, to use it wisely to improve their lives. And I want to say that, you know, I was fortunate in my time here to spend some time outside the walls of this conference over the last 24 hours. And I've been so impressed by the hospitality of the people, even as, of course, as they're reeling from yesterday's horrendous attack. And the first time I was ever in Munich was with my wife, actually, who's here with me today, on a personal trip. And I've always loved the city of Munich, and I've always loved its people. And I just want to say that we're very moved, and our thoughts and prayers are with Munich and everybody affected by the evil inflicted on this beautiful community. We're thinking about you, we're praying for you, and we will certainly be rooting for you in the days and weeks to come.
Again, so notice how he opens it up. So he does nothing but thanks and affection and love. And you may not think it's important, but he's setting a very solid foundation for what he's about to go in. He's mentioned the tragedy, which of course is appropriate, but it folds into the points that he's about to make, which is why it's incredibly smart strategy to start off in this incredibly empathetic tone. Like, show them that he is coming from a place of compassion before he digs right into the root of what JD perceives as the problem, which, of course, is the actual problem.
Now, I hope that's not the last bit of applause that I get, but
You hear that. You hear that. There's a little bit of laughter. They don't really know what he means by that, but JD knows as he's giving this speech, he's fully aware everything he's going to say is deeply unpopular, but at the same time, he just goes ahead and does it because he's not someone who wants to get along with everyone. He's someone who wants to dictate and lead and show people how nation states carry themselves. It's a beautiful thing.
We gather at this conference, of course, to discuss security. And normally, we mean threats to our external security. I see many great military leaders gathered here today. But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense, the threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America.
He's turned it completely against them. This is supposed to be about like kind of a conference where he virtue signals about Ukraine, virtue signals about national security, talks about all our big meanies across the sea, but now he's turning it against them. And that's one of the most beautiful things about everything going on right now. So I'll keep on going and I'm playing it.
Now, I was struck that a former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election. He warned that if things don't go to plan, the very same thing could happen in Germany too. Now, these cavalier statements are shocking to American ears. For years, we've been told that everything we fund and support is in the name of our shared democratic values. Everything from our Ukraine policy to digital censorship is billed as a defense of democracy. But when we see European courts canceling elections and senior officials threatening to cancel others, we ought to ask whether we're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. And I say ourselves because I fundamentally believe that we are on the same team. We must do more than talk about democratic values, we must live them. Now, within living memory of many of you in this room, the Cold War positioned defenders of democracy against much more tyrannical forces on this continent. And consider the side in that fight that censored dissidents, that closed churches, that canceled elections. Were they the good guys? Certainly not. And thank God they lost the Cold War. They lost because they neither valued nor respected all of the extraordinary blessings of liberty. The freedom to surprise, to make mistakes, to invent, to build. As it turns out, you can't mandate innovation or creativity, just as you can't force people what to think, what to feel, or what to believe. And we believe those things are certainly connected. And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action. I look to Sweden, where 2 weeks ago the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Koran burnings that resulted in his friend's murder. And as the judge in his case chillingly noted, Sweden's laws to supposedly protect free expression do not, in fact, grant, and I'm quoting, a free pass to do or say anything without risking offending the group that holds that belief. And perhaps most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. After British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person. But no, this last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law.
So notice everything that he did, and it's really important because I know he goes through a lot of examples here throughout the countries, but the constant throughout it is the preface he gave. What was the preface he gave to all of these stories? You were the good guys that won the Cold War. You took down the evil government participating in censorship and heavy authoritarian tyrannical constriction of people's lives. Where are you now? Who are you now? And the reason this matters is not to strike at the moral hearts or the ethos of the people sitting in front of him, but to remind them of the foundation upon which the very legitimacy of their governments rests upon, which is this concept of democracy. Yes, I know many of us are not big fans of pure democracy, and a lot of us don't want any democracy in our systems, and it's understood because and it's historic because even our founding fathers of our country understood democracy in many ways to be evil. But understand it as a political power tool. All of these countries were good as opposed to the Soviet Union. Why? Democracy. And J.D. Vance is pointing at it and saying, listen, this is what you say you are. This is the legitimacy of your government, and you're not following it whatsoever. And what it does is it doesn't strike their hearts and make them change their minds out of the goodwill of themselves. No, it says to them, hey, look, you are messing with the very legitimacy of your own country. When you screw with all of these laws, when you censor people, when you put all of these oppressive tactics on people and constrict them in this way, you are stabbing at the own legitimacy of your government. Look, every government has some form of legitimacy, right? Charismatic dictatorships have the legitimacy of the people loving them. Monarchs have the legitimacy of, hereditary line or some sort of elective process. Parliaments have their own legitimacy, but the whole thing is when you start screwing with how that legitimacy is established and changing or making questionable the legitimacy of the regimes based upon that concept, you're actually inviting instability and destruction of your own system, which is what is happening across Europe, is that people in France and Germany and the UK and beyond are questioning the legitimacy of the systems they live under and potentially looking to completely change them if they are not allowed to even fight fairly in these systems.
Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizen suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. And in the interest of comedy, my friends, but also in the interest of truth, I will admit that sometimes the loudest voices for censorship have come not from within Europe, but from within my own country, where the prior administration threatened and bullied social media companies to censor so-called misinformation. Misinformation like, for example, the idea that coronavirus had likely leaked from a laboratory in China. Our own government encouraged private companies to silence people who dared to utter what turned out to be an obvious truth. So I come here today not just with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite, and I hope that we can work together on that. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree.
Okay, and you may think that this is some awful thing because your neurons are firing off and you're hearing him say that and you're like, that's just like libertarians that say you can believe all the cringe stuff, but I'll die for your right to say it. No, it's the exact opposite. JD is saying, listen, world leaders, you people in Europe, the Trump administration is going to fight for the rights of your people, your constituents, to actually operate, vote, work, and advocate for their own beliefs in your system. J.D. Vance is saying, listen, if you don't let your own voters control what they get to vote on and what they feel is appropriate for their country at any given time, if you try to silence them, we're going to stand up for them. If you try to censor, we're getting in the way. J.D. Vance is making a geopolitical offer, as he calls it, but many people could perceive it as a threat, and I bet that these global leaders do perceive it as a threat, which explains the deep discomfort that you see in the audience of this event. Just think about the significance of the statement, though. Basically, J.D. Vance is saying, we who used to interfere in your elections to get one side to win are now going to interfere in your censorship and ensure the process is fair. It's a complete reversal of what our feds have been doing all this time. It's a complete reversal of what our deep state policy has been. Very different vision of America's place in global Western civilization. It's an impressive offer, quote unquote. You see how few people are clapping? Do you see how many people look worried? The guy looking at the camera, slightly concerned, the stern look on the man with the glasses, the guy in the background kind of questioning. And you see, like, all of these people, some of them are confused, some of them are curious, some of them are intrigued, some of them do not like a single word of what is being said. It's actually amazing.
Now, we're at the point, of course, that the situation has gotten so bad that this December, Romania straight up canceled the results of a presidential election based on the flimsy suspicions of an intelligence agency and enormous pressure from its continental neighbors. Now, as I understand it, the argument was that Russian disinformation had infected the Romanian elections. But I'd ask my European friends to have some perspective. You can believe it's wrong for Russia to buy social media advertisements to influence your elections. We certainly do. You can condemn it on the world stage even. But if your democracy can be destroyed with a few $100,000 of digital advertising from a foreign country, then it wasn't very strong to begin with. Now, the good news is that I happen to think your democracies are substantially less brittle than many people apparently fear. And I really do believe that allowing our citizens to speak their mind will make them stronger still. Which, of course, brings us back to Munich, where the organized...
So understand, he's bringing it back because a lot of people may feel like he's completely off subject, may feel like he's completely like stranded into his own, ideology, and he's not actually discussing the topic of the security conference. Now he's going to bring it all back to why the world leaders have to care about these things. He's talked about making them stronger. Now he's going to fortify precisely why these world leaders, 99% of which despise what they're hearing, why they have to care about this particular issue.
Organizers of this very conference have banned lawmakers representing populist parties on both the left and the right from participating in these conversations. Now again, we don't have to agree with everything or anything that people say, but when people represent, when political leaders represent an important constituency, it is incumbent upon us to at least participate in dialogue with them. Now, to many of us on the other side of the Atlantic, it looks more and more like old entrenched interests hiding behind ugly Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation, who simply don't like the idea that somebody with an alternative viewpoint might express a different opinion or, God forbid, vote a different way or, even worse, win an election. Now, this is a security conference, and I'm sure you all came here prepared to talk about how exactly you intend to increase defense spending over the next few years in line with some new target. And that's great, because as President Trump has made abundantly clear, he believes that our European friends must play a bigger role in the future of this continent. We don't think, you hear this term, burden sharing, but we think it's an important part of being in a shared alliance together that the Europeans step up while America focuses on areas of the world that are in great danger.
Note exactly what he's saying, and the coded message under all of this, which is particularly that, listen, we're done with Europe. Europe, you're going to have to figure stuff out on your own. You have to build up your military because we have other things to be concerned about. And if you've listened to JD talk at any length, you understand what he means. He means that, look, the U.S. has to defend its interests in Asia and in the Pacific. And at the end of the day, that means taking focus away from Europe. We can't be sitting here babysitting Europe this whole time. And they have to recognize that and take back pieces of their own sovereignty right here and right now. The only problem is that the world leaders here think or don't really care that they have sovereignty, or whatever amount of sovereignty they need is being implemented into the global system that they work as part of. And they don't like the fact that they're being woken up, shaken awake, and being told, hey, no, you actually have to act with a sovereign character now and defend your own selves. You have to work as Europe and defend Europe. They do not like being given responsibility that they were able to shuck off to the United States before.
But let me also ask you, how will you even begin to think through the kinds of budgeting questions if we don't know what it is that we are defending in the first place? I've heard a lot already in my conversations, and I've had many, many great conversations with many people gathered here in this room. I've heard a lot about what you need to defend yourselves from, and of course that's important. But what has seemed a little bit less clear to me, and certainly I think to many of the citizens of Europe, is what exactly it is that you're defending yourselves for. What is the positive vision that animates this shared security compact that we all believe is so important? And I believe deeply that there is no security if you are afraid of the voices, the opinions, and the conscience that guide your very own people. Europe faces many challenges, but the crisis this continent faces right now, the crisis I believe we all face together, is one of our own making. If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you. Nor, for that matter, is there anything that you can do for the American people who elected me and elected President Trump. You need democratic mandates to accomplish anything of value in the coming years. Have we learned nothing that thin mandates produce unstable results? But there is so much of value that can be accomplished with the kind of democratic mandate that I think will come from being more responsive to the voices of your citizens.
So listen to exactly what he's saying here. He hasn't even brought up the primary issue that he really wants to discuss, but he's bringing up the very fact that, listen, you want to defend yourselves, you want to defend your basic oligarchy, but what is the reason you're defending yourselves? What are you defending? Are you defending an economic bloc? Are you defending a bit of soil that you make money off of? Are you defending some sort of fiefdom, or are you defending a nation state? Are you defending a collection of nation states? J.D. Vance is asking this fundamental question because really, what's the difference between a European state and Russia if both are run by oligarchs? If there's no meaningful difference between the rigged elections in Russia and the rigged elections in Europe? The actual legitimacy and difference and moral superiority, allegedly, of the European states comes from being respondent to the will of the people. And so what J.D. Vance is saying, when he says be more responsive to your voters, he's not just saying to not censor parties, just not saying to not stamp out voices. He's saying, well, listen, you guys, you main parties, you people in charge, if you want to keep your legitimacy, if you want to remain in charge, if you want to have larger margins, you have to change policy. You have to change policy to fit what your voters actually want. And your voters, he's going to bring it up, want one very specific thing all across Europe.
If you're going to enjoy competitive economies, if you're going to enjoy affordable energy and secure supply chains, then you need mandates to govern, because you have to make difficult choices to enjoy all of these things. And of course, we know that very well in America. You cannot win a democratic mandate by censoring your opponents or putting them in jail, whether that's the leader of the opposition, a humble Christian praying in her own home, or a journalist trying to report the news. Nor can you win.
And you guys just noticed he has tacitly, without mentioning him, brought up Tommy Robinson, which I think is another beautiful thing.
One by disregarding your basic electorate on questions like who gets to be a part of our shared society. And of all the pressing challenges that the nations represented here face, I believe there is nothing more urgent than mass migration. Today, almost 1 in 5 people living in this country moved here from abroad. That is, of course, an all-time high. It's a similar number, by the way, in the United States, also an all-time high. The number of immigrants who entered the EU from non-EU countries doubled between 2021 and 2022 alone, and of course it's gotten much higher since. And we know this situation, it didn't materialize in a vacuum. It's the result of a series of conscious decisions made by politicians all over the continent and others across the world over the span of a decade. We saw the horrors wrought by these decisions yesterday in this very city. And of course, I can't bring it up again without thinking about the terrible victims who had a beautiful winter day in Munich ruined. Our thoughts and prayers are with them and will remain with them. But why did this happen in the first place? It's a terrible story, but it's one we've heard way too many times in Europe and unfortunately too many times in the United States as well. An asylum seeker, often a young man in his mid-20s, already known to police, rams a car into a crowd and shatters a community. How many times must we suffer these appalling setbacks before we change course and take our shared civilization in a new direction?
So he brings it back to the very beginning. He uses the emotional capital he developed at the start of the speech and expels it out on the crowd. And he goes, how many times are you going to make these stupid tragedies happen one over and over and over again? These completely wholly preventable tragedies. He's speaking taboo. He's speaking blasphemy. He's speaking everything that is sacrilege to these European leaders, but they're having to listen to him. They're having to hear it. And there's nothing they can do to prevent him from continuing on going. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. He's spun it all around, and he's like underlined how this relates to security. He's saying you're endangering your citizens, you're killing your own citizens with these mass migration policies, and you are unresponsive to the electorate that keeps on trying to elect opposition parties that support restricting immigration. He's really bringing it to a forefront. Not just why this relates to security, but why this relates to the legitimacy of their own governments. And he's saying, look, you're either going to have thin margins or you're going to have no margins, because you are going to be overturned by other people that we are going to support and freely allow to speak if you won't, so that we make sure Europe has a voice and the people have a voice. So it's a very threatening kind of message that J.D. Vance has for the European leaders today. But it's very much on topic, and it's very much related to precisely why, not why Europe's in danger, but why their place at the top of it is in danger.
No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. But you know what they did vote for? In England, they voted for Brexit, and agree or disagree, they voted for it. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration. Now, I happen to agree with a lot of these concerns, but you don't have to agree with me. I just think that people care about their homes, they care about their dreams, they care about their safety and their capacity to provide for themselves and their children. And they're smart. I think this is one of the most important things I've learned in my brief time in politics. Contrary to what you might hear a couple mountains over in Davos, the citizens of all of our nations don't generally think of themselves as educated animals or as interchangeable cogs of a global economy. And it's hardly surprising that they don't want to be shuffled about or relentlessly ignored by their leaders. And it is the business of democracy to adjudicate these big questions at the ballot box. I believe that dismissing people, dismissing their concerns, or worse yet, shutting down media, shutting down elections, or shutting people out of the political process protects nothing. In fact, it is the most surefire way to destroy democracy.
And there he goes. Again, what is the underpinning of all of these countries post-Cold War? They are defenders of democracy. They are democratic countries. They listen to their people, and their people offer them legitimacy as states, as governments, as controlled parties. And JD says, what is the greatest danger to your country? The greatest danger is you losing legitimacy. And then he brings it up. Like, you guys are owners of nation states. The people that vote for you, they don't see themselves as interchangeable. They don't think that they're just they don't want you to just like interchange them with whatever group of people you want to import into the country from whatever country around the world. They think that they're French. They think that they're German. They think that they're British. They think that they're Polish. They think that they're European people that you are responsible for. And if you want to continue carrying this nation state and you don't want to be replaced by a new regime that doesn't respect the foundations of democracy, well, you have to start fucking respecting it first. That's what JD's saying here. It's actually beautiful. I keep saying beautiful, but you get what I mean. It's like it's so punctuated. It's so direct. It's very blunt, but it's concise and it's meaningful. He is not mincing words. He is saying exactly what needs to be said to these people, no matter how deeply they distaste it.
And speaking up and expressing opinions isn't election interference. Even when people express views outside your own country, and even when those people are very influential. And trust me, I say this with all humor, if American democracy can survive 10 years of Greta Thunberg scolding, you guys can survive a few months of Elon Musk.
And again, what's the point there? The point there is you've interfered with our elections. You've interfered with our domestic policy. You have brought political actors onto our continent and tried to influence elections in our country with paid little girls like Greta Thunberg that go around doing it. Now, she's not that popular anymore because she went on the Free Palestine binge, and now she's a bit politically toxic to a lot of these countries. But they paid Greta Thunberg to come to the States and push green policy, and we just got to live under 4 years of fully fleshed out green policy. And JD Vance is saying, look, we suffered because of that. We suffered because of what you did, what you pushed onto us. And now we're simply asking for one thing, that you stop whining when we push what your voters want onto you.
But what no democracy, American, German, or European, will survive is telling millions of voters that their thoughts and concerns, their aspirations, their pleas for relief are invalid or unworthy of even being considered. Democracy rests on the sacred principle that the voice of the people matters. There's no room for firewalls. You either uphold the principle or you don't. Europeans, the people, have a voice. European leaders have a choice. And my strong belief is that we do not need to be afraid of the future. You can embrace what your people tell you, even when it's surprising, even when you don't agree. And if you do so, you can face the future with certainty and with confidence, knowing that the nation stands behind each of you. And that, to me, is the great magic of democracy. It's not in these stone buildings or beautiful hotels. It's not even in the great institutions that we have built together as a shared society. To believe in democracy is to understand that each of our citizens has wisdom and has a voice. And if we refuse to listen to that voice, even our most successful fights will secure very little. As Pope John Paul II, in my view, one of the most extraordinary champions of democracy on this continent or any other, once said, "Do not be afraid." We shouldn't be afraid of our people, even when they express views that disagree with their leadership. Thank you all. Good luck to all of you. God bless you.
What an absolute destruction of the very order that Europe is under. And yeah, you know, like the European right should be eating this up. JD Vance is essentially guaranteed the United States will fight for the non-suppression of your views, that your views be allowed to freely operate within these things. And who knows what sort of diplomatic answers that this could bring if it creates tensions between the United States and Europe when Europe tries to silence their right-wing parties. It's very interesting, the new kind of setting that JD Vance has propped up, especially if he becomes president. He's the front runner to become the nominee in 28. And most certainly, if Trump's administration continues the way it has, he will win. And he will probably win more convincingly than even Trump did. And the question is, the million-dollar question, how does Europe respond to what JD Vance just did? Do they let their voters speak? Do they conform their policy to what their voters actually want? Or do they continue silencing? Do they continue alienating themselves from the United States? Because at the end of the day, the United States is big enough to shift wherever else we want. We can build our own little hemisphere of influence, completely separate from both China and Europe. We have the slave country south of us to do it. We can capitulate all of these governments to the United States power. And I don't know if Europe understands the prospects of alienating themselves from us. Not the people, but the elected officials. They have to do some very smart recalculations as soon as possible to reconfigure for this new reality they're living under. And I hope the German elections and then later this year the Canadian elections show them the way that they have to move forward. Yeah, otherwise, I know this has been a long video, but good grief. What a substantial speech. There is something to say about every single sentence, basically, that JD's saying. I should do a video on the AI conference for this exact same reason. He is such a substantive speaker. He does not speak to say a bunch of words and only say one thing. He says a million things with very few words. And that's why it's so easy to expand out, to speak, wax poetic on what he's saying. And I think I'll continue doing that because I'm a big fan of JD. So I hope you guys learned something. I hope you guys have some comments. If you think about anything, what do you want to happen to Europe? What do you want to happen to U.S.-European relations? What do you want to happen? Do you want the voters of the European Union to have their voices heard in each of their respective countries? Do you want Europe to restore its national sovereignty? Do you want those countries to fight for themselves and stop relying on U.S. foreign aid? Do you want them to stop relying on U.S. defense spending? It's your ball. It's your game. Tell me what you think about all of it and about JD's speech in general. Thank God that I have you guys. It's a blessing to be able to talk to you, even if I'm a little bit restricted on Twitter right now. And otherwise, I just hope every single one of you has a fantastic rest of your day. Bye-bye.